I'm excited to be here as we actually come to the conclusion of our brief post-Pentecost series that we've entitled Sent. Because we have here a contrast to the last few weeks. If you've been tracking with us these last couple of weeks, Jesus' teaching from Matthew 10 is not for the faint of heart. He sets the expectations for what it means to be his disciple, and some of you thought I was like being maybe hard on you as we looked at Jesus' teaching. Today is more like the dessert of the meal. It all goes together. We can't separate this from what else he has just told us, but he's continued training up the 12 and those that he's going to send out. And Jesus says that if you'll come to him as the author, as the creator, as our Messiah, that he will give you such a rest that you can go out on mission in the world and actually be an incredibly restful people. Even in the midst of persecution, even in the midst of pandemic, his people are to be marked by an incredible sense of restfulness. We know that the context in which Jesus is giving this teaching is not, it's not a quaint and cozy time. John the Baptist has just questioned whether or not Jesus is really the one. He's in prison. His disciples are about to be sent out. They're about to experience persecution. And Jesus has these words that we've been paying attention to over Matthew chapter 10 and 11. If you have a Bible, I want you to turn it at Matthew 11. It's the end of that passage that we just heard read that we're going to look a little closer at today. Look, if you only ate dessert every day, every meal, you would have some health problems, wouldn't you? You would. But how important it is for us to be encouraged here in this moment. As we're sent out into the world, we discover that Jesus can make us comfortable in uncomfortable situations. This is our great challenge right here in 2020. Is what does it look like to be a restful people in the midst of a restless world? The chaos of life that we're in right now. It reminds me of one of my favorite little scenes from Melville's novel Moby Dick, where he draws a parallel between the raging, roaring chaos of life and the crazy seas. And there's this great line that one of the guys I love to read, Peterson, pulls from there. And he points out that there's one in the midst of the boat on the raging sea that's utterly calm and restful. Everyone else is straining at the oars, trying to catch up to the whale in this scene, but there is one person in the boat that remains totally and utterly calm, and it's the harpooner. He actually rises to his task from a totally different place. Eugene Peterson quotes this when he writes this. Read with me. To ensure the greatest efficiency in the dart, the harpooners of this world must start to their feet out of idleness and not out of toil. If the harpooner abandons his task and he just picks up an oar and begins rowing along with everybody else, just getting sort of chaotic just like everyone else, he'll abandon his task. He won't be able to ensure the greatest efficiency of the dart. Peterson draws the parallel between the church and the whaleboat and the harpooners and those that are disciples of Jesus Christ, and says we are to rise to our task in such a moment as this from a place of utter calm. Do you have that? Do you have a sense of restfulness in this moment that we're in? It's tested us all, hasn't it? It is testing us all. We've been called to be restful. And in Jesus' invitation right here at the end of Matthew 11, he shows us how it is that we can be restful. We here at Church of the Resurrection have made this one of the three main things that we pursue in our common life together. We use 3 R words: rooted, restful, and relational. And I got to tell you, restfulness, there is something about this that is so needed, even when we weren't in the midst of a pandemic in our suburban North Texas life. I want to say a few things about this. We're sent into a world that's in pain, even to a world facing a pandemic, and Jesus says we can be restful in this moment. I want to ask the question of who is it that needs the rest that Jesus offers? How does he describe the rest that he has for us? and how can we actually grab hold of it and get it? Who needs this rest? Who is Jesus talking to? I've made the mistake over my years of thinking that he's talking to those of you who, you need a good nap today. Those of you who are you're especially tired for some reason or another. I used to fall asleep in Greek class. Don't judge me, David Smith. And I had this really gracious professor. I was working full-time for Halliburton at the time, and I would show up to my night classes, and it was all Greek to me. And I fell asleep. It's the only time I can ever claim this. Seriously, I fell asleep a few times. And I went up to the professor, apologized, and he said, it's okay, Jesus said, come to me, you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. So he was totally not threatened by it, not put off by it. He was really gracious to me. Is this just for those of us who, we're facing an especially tough time right now? Is this just for young parents that have all the little feet pitter-pattering around their house and the days are so long? Or those of you that are facing maybe a chronic illness? Who is this for? I want you to know that this invitation of Jesus is not just for those of us that might feel especially restless in this moment or especially fatigued. This is for all of us. This is a universal diagnosis from the great physician. Everyone needs the rest that Jesus has to offer. This is where the Texas slang is really helpful. Who needs it? All y'all. All of y'all. All of us need this rest. And the reason is that we're restless. Some of us, it takes a little longer in life to realize just how restless we are. Does anybody else have a family member that even when they're on the couch, like relaxing, watching a movie, they can't stop moving? Yeah, some of you are raising your hands or pointing at people. We're all restless. It's displayed in different ways in different people. But there's this deep, deep sense in which we're unable to be still. We're unable to really quiet down. Jesus is diagnosing us as human beings as being deeply in need of rest. One of the images that I have when I think about this is the image of either a racehorse or a jumping horse competing that comes up to the next jump and it won't go over. You've probably seen a horse do this. It won't go over the obstacle in front of it, but it's not at peace. It's sort of restless. It's antsy. It's maybe even a bit fearful. And Jesus is diagnosing our condition and saying that we are like that. We can't get over the hurdle of our heart. Something down really deep inside of us is discontent and restless. Every single person needs the rest that Jesus is offering. And sometimes it's hard to diagnose. What's making you restless? What is it that's causing you to be fearful? There's times in our life where we can sort of point to an obvious thing. But there's other seasons of life as you live this life that you'll know it's complex. It's cumulative. It's not any one thing. Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's spiritual, sometimes it's relational. And here we are in Texas. Texans are kind of known for what? Going big or going home, right? We're in a state that is accustomed to pursuing grand things, grand visions. And then here we are in a metropolitan area in the suburbs of a great metroplex in North Texas that's especially prone to be restless. Here in the suburbs that we live in, we're in this place where everyone is trying to pursue the good life, and everyone is striving for more. And there is a restlessness in the water here. If you're not aware of that or you don't know that, talk to the pediatricians in the community about how our kids are doing. By the time they're teenagers, they feel this pressure because they're in a community, they're in an area where the soil is tense. They're being pushed to greatness. It's like it's not okay to be ordinary or normal. This is our mission field, Church of the Resurrection. We've been called to be on mission. We've been sent to a place that's especially restless. How much more important is it for us then to drink deeply in this invitation of Jesus and to become a restful people? Our burdens are not often simple, and so that means that the answer is not always just as simple as, cheer up. You've ever had anybody do that to you where you communicate like a deep sense of burden or a deep weariness, thinking, oh, it'll be fine. It's okay. Just cheer up. That's not what Jesus is doing here. One commentator writes that it's into our weariness, into our burden, steps the most complex power in existence, speaking a promise that, yes, is simple, but it's hopeful and it's refreshing. It's exactly what we need. I'm going to read it one more time. Come to me, he says. This isn't a simple platitude. This is the God of the universe saying that the source, the place, the person that you need to go to tap into this restfulness is him and only him. Come to me, you who labor and are heavy laden, everyone, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, learn from me. What is the rest that he's offering us? Jesus is saying that the universal diagnosis is restlessness, but the solution is him. He's the answer to it. I love this illustration. I can't remember where I came along this illustration, but those of you that struggle to sleep, some of you have shared that with me over the last few months. If you had any level of anxiety in your life prior to 4 months ago, it's probably a little worse. If you were struggling to sleep well at night, you're probably struggling a little bit more. And what Jesus is saying is the kind of rest that we need. It's like if you have a sleeping disorder, you're probably familiar with REM sleep, REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. In other words, you could have hours of just really light rest and it wouldn't actually be what your body needs. You need to go into a really deep sense of sleep to actually feel refreshed and to give your physical body a chance to recover. And what Jesus is saying is there's all these other tactics out there to try to calm yourself down, and some of those are really beneficial, but if you really want the deep rest that your soul and your body and your emotions need, it's him. And he describes himself as the solution to our restlessness. I have 3 things that I want to say really quickly about this type of rest that he offers. I want to try to put it in language just of our everyday life, okay? I think that when you're really at rest and you've received that from the Lord, it means that you know you have nothing to hide. This really frees you up. See, one of the beautiful things about Christianity is that we can be honest about our lives. It's why we confess every week together. It's why we confess every day. We can be honest about life. We've got nothing to hide. We begin every service with that beautiful prayer, Father, before you, all desires are known. It's not just that our outward actions are known. You know the motives of our heart. There's nothing to hide. What this means is that there is nothing in this life that Jesus' life, death, and resurrection doesn't have covered already. And so you and I have nothing to hide. There's no mistake. There's no sin too great. Grace has abounded all the more. You and I have nothing to hide. When we come to Jesus Christ, this begins to put a seed in your life where utter restfulness can really spring up because you know you've got nothing to hide. The other thing is you know you've got nothing to prove. No performance is necessary. What's causing the children in our suburban context to be anxious, some of you that have been in counseling could probably answer this better than me, but we've birthed a culture that is defining our identity by our performance. So what is it that you do, and do you do it well enough to have a sense of identity? What a destructive culture that is. To define oneself not by your relationship to others, not by your relationship to your Creator, but by your performance. By your performance. We're a performance-based culture. Well, here's the thing. When you come to Jesus Christ, you've got nothing to prove. You've got nothing to hide. You've got nothing to prove. Third and finally, and this is so, I think, important in this moment, did you know that as a follower of Jesus Christ, when you come to him, you've got nothing ultimately to fear? You've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to prove, and you've got nothing to fear. So many of us are experiencing fear right now. And by this, I'm not talking about, this is just that moment where leaders can stick their foot in their mouth and be misunderstood on so many topics, on so many levels. When I say fear, I'm not talking about taking like appropriate precautions to avoid becoming ill or to avoid passing on a sickness to someone else. I'm talking about a sense like you almost feel like your anchor has been uplifted in the storm. And you just feel like you're being tossed in every direction. When you come to him, and if you haven't caught on to this, it's something we've got to do regularly. Yeah, there can be a moment in our life, I can look back in a few moments in my life where there was a line in the sand and I crossed over into a different level of trust in my Lord than ever before. And they are unique, sort of altar building kind of moments in my life and in my journey with him. That's absolutely true. And if you've never experienced that, I hope you do today. We've had some great weather right in the middle of our services the last few weeks. For those of you on the live stream, it's raining and thundering here, and we can hear it. In the midst of this storm, you can be anchored to him and have a sense of stability. It doesn't mean the waters are going to calm, but it means you can be calm in the midst of the chaos. You've got nothing to hide. You've got nothing to prove. You have nothing to fear. Who lives like that? Who lives like that? I'm telling you, very few people do. We often think we've become kind of good at hiding those things that we're insecure about, or hiding those things that we sort of want to prove to others, or hiding from others those things that we're afraid of. We're not nearly as good as we may think we are. Those that really love you, those that are in community around you, probably know, maybe more than you know. Are you living from this place of rest? One New York Times writer said, as a writer about his own work, he said, "What happened to me is the quality of my work became the measure of my worth." That's performance-based identity. The quality of my work became the measure of my worth. I want to tell you, you are not unique in that. Every one of us struggles with that. Who or what do you trust in for your well-being? When you go to him alone, you'll learn that you've got nothing to hide, nothing to prove, and nothing to fear. We pastors are notorious for trusting in the quality of our work to determine the value of our worth. It's an incredibly toxic way to live. It's a burden that will absolutely eventually crush you. What Jesus is saying here, I've almost jumped over it, the illustration, because it's an ancient illustration, we have to comment on it, is a yoke. What's a yoke? What have you strapped yourself to? Since we're in Texas, I was making some assumptions I shouldn't, that you know what a yoke is, right? It's strapped to a beast of burden, a donkey or a oxen of some sort. And what Jesus is contending is every single person is yoked to something. And whatever you've trusted in for a sense of your self-worth and identity, that is the thing you are yoked to. And what he is contending is the only way to experience life from a place of utter restfulness is to be yoked only to him. That every other thing, even if it's a good thing, will crush you. It will be a crushing burden. Did you know that's even true of religion? In fact, in the Gospel of Matthew, the only other time Jesus uses the word burden is later on when he tells of the Pharisees who have put a crushing burden on the backs of people that was the burden of religious performance. Who or what is it that you trust in for your well-being? Jesus says, "Come to me. I'm the only one who won't crush you. Take my yoke upon you. I'm the only master who is gentle and lowly in heart, who will forgive you when you fail, who will pick you up when you've fallen." How do you get this rest? And then we'll finish. How do I tap into this? He's already said it. I want you to read it again at verse 25. It's really easy for us to take this famous invitation of Jesus and to miss what he said just a few verses prior to this. What he has said is he says, "I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you've hidden these things from the wise and learned, and you've revealed them to little children." You have to become like a child. I have a friend that's a fellow pastor that went through a long season of a ton of pain. He was diagnosed with a real odd physical illness. It really hurt him and his family. He had several kids at the time. And he said, I went through this almost 2-year-long season where all I could muster up was this. This was the only prayer that I could pray. He would say, Lord, would you help me? Would you heal me? And would you hold me? He couldn't say anything else but that because life was so challenging for him. Would you heal me? Would you help me? Would you hold me? That's the prayer of a child. And Jesus says, unless you become like that, unless you realize your helplessness, unless you realize the Father's good love for you, unless you become like a child, you can't taste this rest. It's a universal invitation. Jesus is actually quoting from a Jeremiah passage, Jeremiah 6, a prophetic passage, where it says, I want to read this before I close, stand by the roads and look, ask for the ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it, and find rest for your souls. Jesus Christ is saying, that's me. He's the answer to the restlessness. The sad thing is the very next verse in Jeremiah 6:16 says, but they said, we will not walk in it. We're going to figure life out on our own. We're not going to become like little children. I know it seems simple, but would you this morning, would you go to him like a child? For me, I actually have to spend an extended amount of time sort of quieting myself down to do this. I have to get quiet, and I also have to get in community. I've needed help from others to know what it is that I'm trying to yoke myself to other than him. Would you get quiet this week? Would you get in community this week? Would you ask God to show you what it is you've yoked yourself to other than him? He's so good. He's so gracious. Charles Spurgeon said once in preaching on this very passage that if you want rest, O weary souls, you can find it nowhere until you come and lay your burdens down at his pierced feet. And you'll find life in looking alone to him. Heavenly Father, may this be so. As we come to your table, would you give us rest? As we come to you alone this week, would you make us a restful people in this very restless moment that we're in? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.